Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be here. I feel as if I'm a little bit of a fraud because INASP is not a publisher, but I think we do have a model that is quite different and quite interesting. Perhaps I should define what INASP stands for, because I don't think it's particularly well known in the States. It's well known in the countries in which we work. It stands for, take a deep breath, the International Network for the Availability of Scientific Publications. So the philosophy surrounding the development of the Journals Online project was that in the early 1990s, a meeting was held at ICSU, which is the International Council for Science in France, of a number of different universities, particularly from Africa, where it was agreed that there was a lack of access to scientific literature in the South. That is, that they couldn't get access to the journals that were being published in the International Forum. And this was largely part of the whole library crisis, but it was compounded in the developing world where they just didn't have money to buy the journals. And secondly, there was a problem in terms of the visibility of their research, that their research was largely invisible to the rest of the world and largely invisible to the rest of their own countries. So, in response to this, in 1992, INASP was created as a subcommittee of ICSU, and in 2004, INASP was registered as a charity in the United Kingdom, which is where we're based. And it was funded at that time by DFID, which is the Department for International Development in the UK, CEDA, which is the Swedish International Development Agency, and NORAD, which is the Norwegian Overseas Development Agency. Now, in the beginning, we had AJOL, which is African Journals Online, and it was established back in those dark ages of 1998. Now, I can attest to the fact that in 1998 in Africa, the internet was almost unknown. You may have heard from my accent, I'm actually from Zimbabwe, and in Zimbabwe in 1998, we didn't even have computers at my university, so this was quite revolutionary at the time. It was established with one member of staff, and its objective was to make African journals available online, so to give them visibility. It was also, as a secondary objective, to provide a revenue stream to those journals. It began, and I'll go through this fairly quickly, with flat HTML pages, really, really simple, just the table of contents with a simple link to the abstract. There was no full text available initially. The journals were paid a subscription, so this was part of the revenue stream, and in return for that, they would send a print copy to AJOL. So we actually had quite a good library of the journals from Africa. However, we stopped paying the subscriptions in 2004. We offered a free document delivery to those countries from the developing countries. They could apply for whichever articles they wanted, and these were supplied as photocopies. Now, I joined INASP in 2003, and a large part of my job was standing in front of a photocopier, photocopying these articles from the journals and then posting them. I'm pleased to say that it's now largely electronic. They have been digitized. But there was also a document delivery charge to the more developed countries, and this is still in place, which again is part of the revenue stream, that journals get a proportion of that charge returned to them. Obviously, they have to reach a certain level of income that's accrued before it is repatriated back to the journals. In 2004, we entered into a partnership with the Public Knowledge Project, which is based in Canada, to use their Open Journal System, OJS, which they were developing for open access journals, basically. And this allowed us to start including the full text for some of the journals at least. In 2005, AJOL moved to local management in South Africa. This has always been one of our objectives, that we set up the JOLs, but then once they're established, we return them to the country of origin, or in this case, it was returned to South Africa after a tender process. This was done because South Africa was felt to have a better logistical setup to be able to continue running the site compared to some of the other countries that applied. It was originally governed by a not-for-profit wing of INASP, which you may have come across, but it later became an independent, not-for-profit organization. It is still funded by CEDA through INASP. CEDA can't fund South Africa directly, so the money is channeled through us and then we pay it to AJOL. There are now 458 journals on that site, so if you haven't looked at it, I suggest that it's definitely worth a look, from 31 countries in Africa. As I say, we no longer manage it, although we are still definitely involved. Moving on to the area that I know, I did actually work on AJOL for some time. It was my baby and it was very hard to give it away, I can assure you. Now I work on these JOLs. So in 2006, we got requests from a variety of countries, particularly Nepal and Vietnam, to set up JOLs in their countries. So it was slightly different from AJOL in that these countries wanted a single site on which the research from their countries would be showcased. So 2006, 2007, we had Nepal, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. And then we went on to the Philippines, and then Sri Lanka. LAN Joel, I always like to say LAN Joel, because it sounds like a little lamb. But LAN Joel is Nicaragua and Honduras, with the possibility fairly soon of Cuba and El Salvador being added to that list. And that is a bilingual site. The content is in Spanish, but the metadata is, in most cases, in English and in Spanish. And then the most recent one, in 2011, was Mongolia Joel. Now, in terms of partnerships, INASP has partnered, as I've said, with the Public Knowledge Project and with Crossref. Both of these have been mutually beneficial. I think obviously we've got the biggest benefit, but with PKP, they adjusted their software on the basis of the developments that we made to their OJS system. The main one of those making it a multi-journal site, because originally it was a single journal site. With Crossref, we've enabled them to allocate DOIs to a large number of developing country articles which they wouldn't normally have had access to, because they are not interested in dealing with lots and lots of very, very small journals. But by doing it through us, we become the administrators of that fiddly process, and they don't have to worry about it. In country, we work through country coordinators who help us in terms of in-country training, setting it up. They are ambassadors for us. And we also work with publishing organizations if they exist. But of course, our most important partners are the editors, who we work with all the time on a day-to-day basis. I've just put this up. I'm not going to read through it, but those are some of the local partners that we're working with. In particular, in Bangladesh, which we're in the process of handing over. So that's the Bangladesh Academy of Sciences will be taking over Banglajol. And in the case of Sri Lanka, they are also in the process of taking it to local management at the National Science Foundation of Sri Lanka. In terms of the visibility of the JOLs, now here I'm only including the ones that we now manage. So you'll see that the Philippines has disappeared and Vietnam has disappeared because they have already been transferred back to local management, and so we are not involved in their statistics and so on anymore. But I think what's interesting is the number of journals. Who knew that Bangladesh had 110 journals, and that's nowhere near the total. I still have a whole long list of journals waiting to come onto the site. Nepal, the same thing. When we started, we thought we might manage 10, and we now have 83. Mongolia is the one that's been a little bit of a problem. It's a number of reasons for it, which I'm not going to go into here, but it does still exist, and there are 2 journals on that site. Also interesting is the percentage of open access of those sites. 2 of them are 100% open access, that is, you can read all of the articles. The others are pretty high, 90%, 88, 96%. That means that basically if there is content for a journal, it will be open access. Right, whizzing through these ones fairly rapidly. Just some pretty graphs. The number of journals added to the JOLs, showing that the different colours represent the different JOLs. So we've had a fairly consistent addition, but I think the 2013 one is interesting because we've already hit nearly as many as we had in the whole of last year in the first quarter. Downloads, a very satisfactory increase over the years. It took a little while to get going, but last year we had 4.5 million. Now, that's not a huge figure compared to some of the other sites that we've been hearing about, but these are journals that would not have been seen at all were it not for these sites. Number of visitors per year to the JOLs, again, a satisfactory increase. Bangladesh is always the biggest, but that's because there are more journals on their site, therefore they have more content. I just thought I'd throw this in, a relationship between the number of visitors to the number of downloads we have. With Sri Lanka Joel, for every visitor there is to the site, there are 9 downloads, which I think is quite satisfactory. It suggests that we have return visitors and that they are finding this content useful. I just put this slide in just quickly on use of mobile phones. We've never promoted this. We don't have a specific app. The sites are optimized for mobile use. But as we can see by 2013, it's increased significantly to 12% of the visitors are coming through mobile use. So this is something we're keeping an eye on. But our sites are very, very simple and very bandwidth light. They only have the image of the cover of the journal and no other images at all, because we're very conscious of bandwidth problems in the countries we work in. The challenges. Firstly, obtaining funding for INASP as a whole, because we needed to convince the funding agencies that they should fund universities, university libraries, and journal editors, which is a bit of a stretch because usually they're wanting to fund the more basic needs of water supply, health, childcare. And so we had to make the argument that by funding research institutions who can then do the research, get access to international research, and share the research that they're doing, you are contributing to the development of countries. And we have been quite successful in doing this. The second challenge here relates to 5-year funding cycles, because each time you start a new funding cycle, you have to change the emphasis slightly of the whole program, and my area is just one part of INASP. Luckily, we haven't been too seriously affected by that. The location of AJOL was a challenge. That is, where were we going to send it to local management? And that is why we started it in Oxford, because there was all that rivalry, who was going to get it, where was it going to be based. So we said, we'll start it, we're neutral, and then we put it out to tender. And of course, there's always the problem of identifying new journals, although I have to say that once each of the sites was started, it very quickly became a self-perpetuating thing where the journals approach us. Creating the new Joels was a challenge because, again, we have to start identifying new journals in a new country. It's always difficult to find current content because many of these journals are run by part-time editors who do it because they have a passion. They very often are running late, and they very often forget to tell us when a new issue is ready or has been published. The system we offer does have a full peer review system, but many of the editors are not comfortable with using it. Many of them are not comfortable with using computers, period. So a lot of the time we receive PDFs from them and we load them at INASP. Local management is a major challenge because we need to find appropriate organizations. We need to be assured that they have sufficient funding, that they have official support to do this, and that they have the personnel that are required to run it. In the future, for the next 5 years, we're going to be concentrating on the quality of the journals, as well as increasing the number on the sites. This is largely in terms of their production, not so much their content, because we're not qualified to do that. And we're also going to be looking at introducing some subject portals, which is in a way going back to what Joel was, where you combine lots of countries and you then allow people to search through a number of different countries' journals. So we'll be combining the countries back together again. So thank you very much.